Columbus has always had rich African-American history. From the late 1800s to present day, we've always been on the move. It's as if every street has a story to tell. And our very own community historian, Rita Fuller-Yates, is here to tell it.
Go, girl, do your thing. Go, girl.
That's right. Your homegirl's on the scene. She's out here uncovering the facts and sharing the history in the streets. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of History in the Streets. I am your host, Rita Fuller-Yates. Please tag and share. Hit that SHARE in the corner, and please send that out to your community. We have a lot of information and a lot of history to go over today, and as usual, your girl is so excited. I love it, love it, love it. I'm gonna give you guys a couple of minutes, couple of seconds to take care of matters of home, and matters of home is sharing. Please share. Now I'm standing here on the side street, on a street better known as the Livingston Heights. They call it actually Livingston Heights Place, but in history it was called Livingston Heights. And it's right off of Livingston, across the street from Hartley. Many of you may have passed it in driving, may have not been aware that it is an African-American community. And it was developed by Dr. Shermanmanuel and Mr. Charles Jones. We'll talk about this particular development. It was done and developed in 1944. Now, just so that you guys can get a little gauge of that time frame, my mother was born in 1945, so that should give you an idea. My father was born in 1944, so this wasn't very long ago, and many black communities were being built during this time, and this particular community was one of them. I want to go over some of those history perspectives today. I want you guys to feel free to ask questions, put them in the comment section, and I'll make sure to follow up with them if we don't get them in the show. Now, there is approximately 25 houses that we will talk about today, but we want to stay focused, and we may not get through today talking about everyone, so this may be a series that we will finish up like we've done in the past. But I first want to pay attention and draw your attention to the first house that is directly behind me. Now, this particular house was owned and built by Waldo and Harriet Toler. I know you guys may know them from Toler Drugs. We're familiar with the family. We're familiar with their legacy. We're familiar with his father was Ralph Waldo Toler, who was a famous Black War correspondent. But this was the first home that was built here in Livingston Heights, and they were actually the first family to purchase a lot here. But considering that there's going to be 3 different streets that we'll talk about, I want to make sure I spend some time sharing the history of this community. But before we do that, you know I have to say hello, because again, you guys don't have to spend your afternoon with me. Thank you very much for joining me. Hey, Auntie Debbie, thank you. Hey, Vanetta Howard, thank you for joining me. Hey, Ronita. Hey, baby girl. Hey, Gaga, thank you very much. Yes, did you know that that was Tyler's home, Gaga? I had no idea, but I absolutely love it. It's the cutest house. And thank you, Melissa Favors. Please continue to tag and share. Now, we're talking about specific homes that were built by African Americans here off of Livingston Avenue. I don't know if you knew that the Livingston Heights Place community was built by African Americans at a very unique time in 1944. Now, although African Americans lived in Columbus since its very beginning, we normally lived in close-knit communities that were built by professionals, but they normally were in the inner city. On the east side of Columbus was where many of us lived. On Mount Vernon, on Long Street. But in the 40s, Black people wanted to think bigger. There were professionals who wanted more for their families to build a bigger legacy. And this is when the idea to begin thinking of having our own communities became a new, innovative way of thinking. Now, we visited a few of these communities today, or I've talked about a few of these communities that's remained vibrant and represented Black communities. We've talked about Hayden Village. We've talked about Eastgate. We've talked about the east side of Columbus. We've talked about Franklin Avenue. So those are just some of those communities that currently still remain. And some of the reason why we talk about this, again, is to preserve history. The more you know about it, the more that we're able to tell our stories to the next generation to ensure that we preserve all of this wonderful history that we created. We created it. I love that type of stuff. Now, you know, I always love history, but I also like to make sure you guys understand the beginning of history. And if he can turn the camera just quickly around so you can show how close we are to Livingston Avenue. Livingston Avenue was actually its own story within its own self. So I thought we'd start our history lesson with understanding more about Livingston Avenue and how it all began. And then we'll talk about how it is that Black people became prominent enough to begin building their own homes in this area. So we have a small 30-second clip that I want you guys to watch, and we'll talk about it when we get back.
In 1804, Edward Chin Livingston and family settled along Alum Creek on land granted by his father, who was a Revolutionary War veteran. The only other families then settled along the creek were the Nelsons, the Whites, and the Newberries. Livingston later served as county judge.
Hello, everyone. So as the clip had explained, Livingston Avenue was named after a Revolutionary hero. And actually the land was given to his family and they began building on it. And what I have to assume is the Livingston family was more than likely anti or abolitionist because as you've noticed, going down Livingston Avenue, there's several Black communities that was built off of this land that we feel confident that the Livingstons was responsible selling to us. So you got to pay attention to how history works and why it is that we ended up in the communities that we did, because it normally took a white community or a white person to believe in us to sell us the land, okay? So this particular house, we want to spend a couple of seconds talking about that. This is 3220 Livingston Avenue. Let me get my boundaries together. Now, before we talk about the specific homes, I want to make sure you guys realize that during this period in America in 1944, it was still very challenging for African Americans to obtain home ownership. I know many of us were professionals, many of us obtained a lot of opportunities at a unique time, but there were still challenges when it pertained to owning a home. Now, keep in mind that a lack of decent homes was a challenge for African Americans. High prices of the homes that they were trying to sell to us was challenging, as well as we were obtaining bad loans from individuals or from banks, which wasn't a good opportunity for us. This was when Black people started thinking about building their own communities as well as their own homes. And this community is definitely a true example of that. I have actually a neighbor behind me
is this for?
So, I'm going to give you a card. I'll tell you a little bit about it. So, my name is Rita Fuller-Yates, and I'm a lifestyle expert and a historian.
Oh, okay.
And we primarily focus on Black local history. And of course, this is a Black community that a lot of people are not aware was a Black community, or is a Black community. And so what we try to do is highlight on Facebook. We have our own Facebook page that talks about the history. See what a camera does? That's a weird light.
Yeah. No, a lot of people get accidents out here.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. So we talk about the history of the community. We talk about the legends that help build the communities. And then we go individually to each house and talk about what the homeowners know about the history, and if you know history of your house. And I know that you partied yesterday, so you're probably a little bit tired.
Yeah, I don't know. My 50th birthday.
I know, I was a part of it, and you just didn't know.
Yeah.
I came last night just to do my research, and I actually spoke with Brenda.
Okay, yeah, what my name is.
Yeah, and she filled me in on a lot of things that I didn't already know. But of course, I would love to get your input. You might want to get closer.
No, not right now. Let me go in the house and change my clothes.
Oh, really? You're
just
going to have to
waking
do all
up.
that?
Yeah, I
Okay.
just woke up. It's my birthday. I'm sleepy and
Do you happen to know the history of this house, though?
I really don't.
Okay.
Brenda probably know all the stuff.
Well, we have a little information, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to let you get all gathered together.
Tired.
Get
Wake
your
up. Wake up.
Leo's, we going ready, honey.
Yeah, I'm trying to wake up.
I get it. Happy birthday, and thank you for your time. And honestly, you know how to throw a party. Yeah. So again, sometimes we have those neighbors that want to share. Sometimes they're in their own life moments, which is okay with us. That's why we call this History in the Streets. It doesn't stop us from sharing the history, but it also makes us understand that everybody has their own personal lives. So again, we want to make sure you guys understand where we are. We're at Livingston Heights Park. For those of you that are just tuning in, this was a community established by African-American doctor and his friend in 1944. As I said, this was a challenging time in order for Black people to obtain home ownership. More than anything, obtain home ownership by purchasing or building their own homes. And it was a new innovative idea. Now I'm going to have you guys watch a little clip that's going to give you a little, that's going to give you a little understanding of Black people and the challenges that we've always had in obtaining home ownership. And we'll talk about it when we get back.
The African American Settlements and Community Report indicated in the 1930s, with the country mixed in the depth of the Great Depression, there were 13 to 15 million people at that time unemployed. The African American community suffered dearly. In 1930, Nimrod Allen's team at the Columbus Urban League found a general deterioration in the housing condition amongst most African Americans, and this was the result of a general decline in employment.
So again, home ownership was difficult for African Americans. We had to begin thinking bigger. We had to begin thinking more innovative, considering that we wanted to begin creating legacies for our families as well. It sometimes was challenging for us to obtain good home loans. We had to sometimes go to smaller cities in Ohio in order to obtain a home loan. But again, these African Americans, primarily professionals, doctors, attorneys, teachers, superintendents, politicians, thought different and bigger for the legacy of our communities. And again, they are long lasting to this very day. I have a particular story, a special story that I want to make sure you guys recognize the home behind me. This actual location is 1187 South Wyant Avenue. Now, what makes and creates the three communities, or the three streets of the communities, is Wyant Avenue, what was that other W? Waverly Street and Bryan. Okay, so just so that you know, when you're walking or riding down Livingston, you know what this community is, and it literally is right across the street from Hartley High School. Now, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about this particular home because it's really special. A famous person had lived here as she grew up. Many of us are familiar with maybe her father. This was the Toler family house at 1187 South Wyant. Attorney William Toler, his firm resided on Mount Vernon Avenue. His mother, his wife's name was Shirley Tony Toler. I should say his second wife. His first wife was Esther. Tony and attorney William married in 1957. Their daughter Kathy became a doctor. And I'm gonna let you guys guess this question. Can you tell me who their other daughter is, who also is a famous Toler? Toler, T-O-L-E-R. And she's famous, and she grew up here in Columbus, Ohio, and attended Columbus School for Girls. I love that type of stuff, right? Now, what's unique about this home, if you can see, in the front is actually the garage. That was built first, and before the home was built, because it was the idea that as this community was being built, that it's specifically this house, that they wanted to make sure they reserved all of the tools and all of the maintenance that was needed to build the home, and they would store it inside the garage. Thought that was pretty innovative, right? It looks a little different considering it's in front. Now keep in mind, this community in 1944 was actually much farmland. It was much like farmland. It actually was farmland. Anything east of James Road was all trees or farmland. And I have a small photo of what it actually looked like when the two gentlemen decided to buy the land. This was actually a carriage, a farm carriage, and they had cows and pigs on the land. I think that's pretty cool, right? Now Hartley, where Hartley is positioned, like I said, right across the street, that actually was a pig slaughter company. So this, again, this was not what we see it today. So for Black people to be this innovative, to have seen how the city was growing, to see how the city was, the direction it was going, and for them to build homes in the middle of a farmland was pretty risky. Now keep in mind, they didn't have any sewage. So we had to buy our own sewage systems. We had to use processes for the first time for African Americans in Columbus, Ohio. We had to create our own. And this was a true example of that. Prior to this, most of the time, the communities were already established, and then we built those homes or bought those homes, which ultimately created those communities. But what's real and cool about this community is we built every nit and pitty of it, okay? And I love that type of stuff. Now let's talk a little bit about some specific houses.
Who's the famous person?
Oh, you guys didn't hear. Oh, I'm sorry, Lynn Toler from the divorce court. I'm sorry, I didn't answer that. Lynn Toler lived there. So this is why we do History in the Streets, because it's so easy to miss the details of people's humble beginnings. Her father was an attorney, her mother was an attorney, our stepmother was an attorney, and they actually was the first African Americans to have a firm owned by African Americans. So again, I love this type of stuff. We wouldn't know this if we didn't know our history. And it's so important to know our history, right? Okay, so now we're going to the house we actually passed on Livingston Avenue. 3270, or actually it's to the left. We didn't see it. That's probably why I had you have a photo of it. We're going to have to go back up there, and we'll go up there. We'll actually walk that way. And while we're walking that way, I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was one of the founders of the community, Dr. Shermanmanuel. He practiced medicine at Grant Hospital. He found the Brother Martin Home of victims of cerebral palsy. Now again, you know, I'm big on legacy, I'm big on leadership. And one of the things I always talk about is most leaders wasn't only valuable in one particular area. When a leader was born to the Black community, they worked in many facets of that community, including home ownership. He also was responsible for Brother Martin Home of Victims. So he had another mission. These particular people understood the value of building communities and why they had to do it, because it took more than one person's vision in order to implement these processes. And I love that, love it, love it, love it. Now we talked about the Toler home. Was it 1166? I think this is 1166. Oh no. I'm getting mixed up because this is Livingston and this is Wyatt. And I need to go to 1166 because that's the actual other founder. Or no, it's not. That's Charles Jones's home. He's a businessman. Yes, he was the co-founder of the community. I'm sorry. And he's the father of Faye Jones, who was a selective service worker out of New York. She adopted a German family while serving in Germany, and she fed and clothed them. Again, this was in 1930-something. So we were African-American people on a proud to be our better selves, and don't let anyone tell you that we didn't do international challenges as well. She obviously was a very intelligent woman in order to work for the government, federal government, and work internationally in Germany. So again, her humble beginnings begin here on Wyatt Avenue off of Livingston Avenue. Now we know a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to take a couple of weeks to discuss, because there's several houses, there's so many amazing people that help build these communities, and I don't want to miss any of them. But we want to make sure you guys recognize a few of the other ones that were responsible for building this community up. I think that is so important. We talked about Waldo and Harriet Tyler being the first people to build this community. And now let's go into a little more detail. When Dr. Manuel and Mr. Jones purchased the land, as I said, it was cows and chickens living on the land. These houses became the suburbs of Columbus, and many people, including white people, would drive down Livingston Avenue and spend the Sunday afternoon just looking at the homes, not recognizing sometimes that they were owned by African Americans. It was actually said in an article that I read, and here is the house actually, by Dr. Shermanmanuel. It was actually said that people would drive out here as if it was the suburb, and they would look at his home as if it was somewhat of an oasis. And sometimes they were challenged with wanting to go indoors or stay outdoors because of the beautiful gardens that was in the back. And indoors, it was top fashion design, interior design for the time. They had everything, and it was actually a rumor that there was a pool in the basement, but of course that came out to be not true. That's why we love to read the little articles that tell you personally about people's stories and how they feel about a particular community. Okay, I think my time is coming up now. We talked a little bit about each house. There's 25 of them, and I know I have at least 20 more to go. But there's probably about 3 or 4 that I really want to go over, and we're going to spend that time talking with you guys next week about it, because we are running out of time. Now, what's important that we talk about before we leave is the value of these communities and why it is that we preserve them. Why is it that we constantly, or I constantly, talk about it? I'm only one person. It takes a village to raise me. And guess who the village is? Y'all are the village. So I tell y'all so that y'all can help me tell the story so that these particular communities' stories are shared and preserved, okay? That's the only reason why we do History in the Streets. Now we do this at 5 o'clock every Sunday. 6:30 is Columbus Black News, so I'm about to run home, get changed, and get ready for that next episode. But I want you guys to keep in mind, as you're driving down Livingston Avenue, please take a look over. If you're right by Hartley Avenue, I'm at Hartley High School, look over to your left-hand side across the street, and you'll notice what we better know today as Livingston Heights Place. Guess what? I'll see you guys next week, the same time, 5 o'clock every Sunday, for another episode of History in the Streets. My name is Rita Fuller-Yates, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.